Okay, and welcome back for part three this week. We are starting with regulations of public and private databases, right? So we switch our focus now to information processing in that taxonomy that we talked about in part one. Okay, so the genesis of the Fair Code Information Act. So frankly, there was a committee that recommended the creation of a national data center that was an immediate outcry from citizens and legislatures expressing concern would be the point here. So the Fair Code Information Act would not have a secret database, right? Remember, the Privacy Act of 1974 represents Congress's effort, and the Code of Fair Information Practices had to apply limitations as it applied only to government databases. So the Privacy Act of 1974 it fell short, right? Applying only to government databases, as I just mentioned, only covering records indexed by a personal ID. And etc., right? And we want these limitations, I think, to be applied elsewhere. Legislation for private institutions was then covered by the Fair Credit Reporting Act, Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act, and Financial Services. So they're trying to address the private institutions. I think more can be done. The Fair Credit Reporting Act promotes the accuracy and privacy of our information used by the credit bureaus. The Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act of 2004, this requires bureaus to provide customers with a free copy of their credit report every 12 months so that we can review, delete, or correct errors. It also has provisions to reduce identity theft, and it requires the truncation of account numbers in that regard. The Financial Services Modernization Act was also approved, allowing for the creation of financial supermarkets. These offer banking and insurance and brokerage services, and the law also contains some privacy-related provisions. Data mining has become a big issue in the government. Data mining is actually the process of searching through one or more databases looking for patterns of relationships among the data. We have IRS audits, right? The IRS does use a computer that matches data with data mining strategies, right? The IRS uses an algorithm called the discriminant function diff to score every tax return. And the diff score is an indicator of how many irregularities are on the tax form. I believe TurboTax, when you do your taxes online, has a similar algorithm to score your tax return before you submit it. It's helpful knowing likely what the IRS will be looking for. There is, but all this a result of this data mining that they're doing. There's a syndromic surveillance system, hard to say. This is a computerized system that analyzes all of the 911 calls and visits to emergency rooms, school absenteeism, purchases of prescription drugs, and internet searches. And they're looking to find patterns in this data mining that might indicate the onset of an epidemic or an illness or bioterrorism, for example. And it's been used to some effect. There's the Telecommunications Records Database. So after 9/11, several major telecom companies began turning over their phone records of tens of millions of Americans. And so there was a class action lawsuit filed against these telecom companies, and the Court of Appeals in the Sixth Circuit overturned the ruling on the grounds that plaintiffs did not have standing in the court, right? You have to have standing in the court to bring a lawsuit. And so the lawsuit really should have been upheld. The right decision was made by the Sixth Appeals Court because someone with standing didn't bring the appeal. But they should have brought the class action lawsuit with the people with standing. I think it would have been upheld. There's also in data mining predictive policing, which is to use the data mining to deploy police officers to areas where crimes are more likely to occur. We talked about this by data mining Facebook, for example. Where's going to be the big party tonight in town? So instead of having your police force all over the town in their usual spots spread out, you could take them from areas that generally don't have much crime and move them to that party area to ensure peaceful time for everyone. And of course, when we profile, there are always potential harms, as this slide indicates. Please pause and review. Now, the national ID card comes to mind as something that could be used. So in order to combine information from several records, the records must share a common key. This is a record sharing requirement. How do I know who you are in each database unless you have a common key? So the name can't be used as a common key because more than one person can have that name, for example. But even if the individual had a unique identification number, a massive electronic dossier could be built nowadays with data mining to document a person's life. So we want to be careful on how we go forward, which brings to mind then the Social Security number, right? So Social Security Act of 1935, this is a federal system of old age benefits to retired people, as well as a federal state system of unemployed insurance. Now, the U.S. government initially stated that the SSN would be used solely by the Social Security Administration and not as a national ID card. However, even in 1943, Roosevelt ordered the federal agencies use Social Security numbers as identifiers in new federal databases. So it really becomes, in essence, a national ID. Unfortunately, the Social Security numbers had defects. Doesn't make a good national ID. For example, they are not necessarily unique, right? Multiple numbers were issued to the same people. Second defect is that they're rarely checked or scrubbed for data quality. And a third defect is that they have no error detecting capability, right? Such as the check digits at the end of a number or in the check cashing process, right? So there are arguments for the national ID card and of course listed here arguments against a national ID card. So which brings us then to the federal government's Real ID Act. And the thought here was to make driver's licenses more reliable, a more reliable form of identification. Now, there were critics who would say that the act creates a de facto national ID card, even though it's state by state. So the Real ID Act requires that every state issue new driver's license. I just got mine last year in my current state. And so this new license will be needed in order to open up bank accounts or even get in a federal building or receive government service. And each state is responsible for issuing this new driver's license that must meet federal standards. So it's actually the states issuing licenses that are meeting federal standards. Supporters would say it's more reliable. Critics fear having machine readable information, right? This balancing act that we started this conversation with in part 1 continues. So there are possible consequences to the new act. Now, the next part of the taxonomy is information dissemination, right? And so if you're interested, there's more information on page 103 in relation to these various acts of information dissemination. I ask you to review that, including FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, which a lot of educational institutions are concerned with. The Video Privacy Protection Act is another. The HIPAA. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Now, in this act generated in 1996, the Department of Health and Human Services, generally called HHS, came up with guidelines for protecting the privacy of patients. And so, effective in April of 2003, they limit how doctors, hospitals, pharmacies, insurance companies, etc., can use medical information from patients. They limit the exchange of information among healthcare providers, that releasing information to life insurance companies and banks is of an issue, and they must provide patients with a notice describing how they will use the information, and patients have the right to see their medical records. After HIPAA, there is in the literature discussed the Freedom of Information Act. It's been used successfully. I have responded to multiple Freedom of Information Act requests when I was in the government space. I am no longer. And even toll booth records. We will Easy Pass, right? An automatic toll booth collection system, right? And drivers with Easy Pass tags pass through without stopping or paying, right? If you live in New Jersey, New York, sometimes Pennsylvania, and the turnpikes have Easy Pass, other states too. It's data collection that can be used in terms of data mining. And so the last part to discuss is this invasion, right? Which pretty much wraps it up. For more on this topic, such as telemarketing, I ask you to review pages 305 and 306 of the book. I'll just skim through my slides. All of these addressed in the final pages of the book. Okay, that's it. 3 parts this week. Very interesting topic. Dig into the book. Enjoy the discussion, etc. Because privacy and the government role and oversight should be a concern to all of us. No matter where we fall on the spectrum, we were looking for the right balance. Okay, thanks. Have a great week, you guys.